The GameCube delivered a ton of visually amazing games back in the early 2000s. However, there's one aspect to these now retro visuals that continues to amaze me every time I revisit the system, which is the water. For whatever reason, Nintendo was seemingly obsessed with water during the 2000s. The GameCube featured a bizarrely high quantity of games with an extensive focus on water, yet somehow also over-delivered on the quality of those water visuals and interactivity, as we'll explore in this video. As a quick side note, the channel is only a handful of subscribers away from the big 5,000 milestone, so thank you to all current supporters, and please consider subscribing if you enjoy this content. I also want to mention that all of the gameplay in this video was captured from original GameCube hardware to show the visuals and water in its original form. So let's start with one of the most obvious and impressive water showcases, which is Mario Sunshine. A surprisingly divisive game in the 3D Mario lineage, Sunshine literally gave Mario a water gun named Flood, complete with various nozzles and abilities. The water in this game just feels extremely interactive and alive. You can spray water on surfaces and they become wet. There are simulated waves or volumetric movements in large bodies of water. Mario leaves convincing ripples behind him when he swims, or white slipstream or puffs of water from different nozzles. Water actually appears to slide down surfaces such as this stone path, and the water surfaces glisten and reflect sunlight in believable ways. We see convincing reflections that vary based on the composition of the water and even reflect moving objects above the surface. Water mixes with interesting colors and patterns, and my personal favorite, the beach areas have a tide that actually rises and falls, and if you walk along the edge, Mario sort of kicks up sand, leaves footprints and splashes, and it all kind of blends together really nicely as you run in and out of the water. I remember spending tons of time just playing around with the water interactions as a kid, and being amazed that this was even possible. This was a massive step up from the water in Mario 64 after all. It's crazy to think that these two water visuals are only one generation apart. In many ways, I feel like Nintendo still has yet to truly outdo themselves with water after Mario Sunshine. For example, if we look at some comparisons to even their newest 3D platformer, Donkey Kong Bonanza on Switch 2, I think Sunshine mostly still holds its own. Bonanza is obviously a far more detailed game overall, with large and destructible environments. But when you consider the Switch 2 is 4 generations later and hundreds of times as powerful as a GameCube in terms of raw flops, it's sort of crazy to think about how well Sunshine holds up in terms of water effects. Wave Race Blue Storm is perhaps the next closest game on this list that gives Mario Sunshine a run for its money in terms of best water. Blue Storm is also almost 25 years old now, but the water effects hold up shockingly well even against modern games in terms of behavior and mechanics. This game has 3D waves that influence the physics and behavior of your jet ski and steering controls. One thing that's often disappointing about water in most modern games is that it still usually looks super flat and non-interactive, even if the visual appearance is realistic or higher fidelity. In Wave Race, you can actually feel how the races and gameplay interactions change based on the variable wave height, which can go all the way up to 6 feet or so. Rain actually creates ripples on the surface of the water. Reflections vary based on the behavior or roughness of the water. For example, here on the still water, the reflections are more clear and glassy, whereas rougher harbor seas create more blurred reflections. Jet skis leave behind convincing water trails and churn. It's a shame that this franchise never escaped the 2000s, since it would be fascinating to see what such care and detail could achieve on modern hardware. Star Fox Adventures also features impressive and fairly extensive water content, probably beyond what most people remember. Thorntail Hollow features beautiful running streams and waterfalls that glisten and splash as you trek across them. I remember landing in this area and exploring every spot I could find as a kid, amazed at how alive it all looked and felt after the days of the N64. Cape Claw features one of the most beautiful water areas on the system, providing a convincing coastal tropical area with a full day and night cycle. The water in this game leans heavily into the illusion of refraction, or the bending of light as it strikes the water, resulting in some unique looking reflections. Fox himself creates 3D-looking ripples on the water as he swims around. And almost all of the different areas in the game have some form of water in them, such as Cloud Runner Fortress, and there's even a limited water temple. Metroid Prime 1 and 2 feature some of the most realistic and nuanced water on GameCube because so many of these effects are so subtle, but they all add up to something special. There are so many details here that it's difficult to capture them all. One of the most memorable moments of the GameCube generation was landing on Talon 4 as Samus Aran and looking up at the deeply atmospheric, believable rain of the Talon overworld. Water droplets trickle across Samus's visor and arm cannon, a believable effect that still looks great today. Water surfaces believably distort when you shoot them using a clever polygon mesh trick, and they're even affected by Samus walking through the water or rolling around with the morph ball. My personal favorite effect, water actually slides across your visor when you enter or exit a body of water. I think this effect still looks super convincing today. Your viewing distance underwater is initially limited by a realistic blur until you find the gravity suit. You can really feel the weight of the water around you and its distorting effect on gravity as you explore. Underwater enemies float lifelessly after you defeat them. Schools of fish swim around believably. Underwater plants and creatures release air bubbles. Enemy audio is distorted around you, and subtle particles float in the light to show that you're submerged in a liquid. Water even moves beneath transparent ice and the Phendrana drifts. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes took these ideas to the next level with the Torvus Bog, which features extensive underwater areas, a rarity in games, as well as more complex pools of water. I think this particular area of Prime 2 is a true technical marvel for the GameCube. The Sanctuary Fortress always gets all the credit in Echo's discussions, but I think the Torvus Bog is equally impressive in its own way. Retro Studios somehow managed to make this highly organic environment look and feel so alive on such limited hardware, a feat that's difficult to achieve even today. Some enemies can submerge in and out of water, and their animations change accordingly. Waterfalls and rain drench the environments. This sequel even has large boss fights, both under the water and on top of the water. It was impressive to see the Chica larva and Queen crashing and heaving in and out of the water in a multi-phase battle. Now, Resident Evil 4 was of course another graphical powerhouse on the system. Initially a GameCube exclusive, until it was later ported to every system imaginable, this game felt like the next generation had arrived early in January of 2005. The game originally rendered in widescreen within a 4x3 format to save on pixels. It was pushing the visuals that hard. I've enlarged the widescreen view from Letterbox to fill this screen. Resident Evil 4 features impressive water your character wades through up to waist deep, and it reacts realistically to your movements and weapons. There's also just a lot of variety. For instance, an intense boss fight pits you against a lake monster that drags and spins your boat across the surface. The storm and rain effects are also extremely convincing and detailed. These shots still look great today. There are even water wheels and waterfalls and other mechanisms or interactions. RE4 is the most realistic looking game on this list overall, and I think the water holds up better than some of the other elements of the experience. In 2003, Nintendo decided it wasn't enough to put Mario on a tropical island or Samus in a submerged frigate. They also had to throw Link into the ocean. Wind Waker is a great example of a more stylized or cel-shaded water system that remains timeless. The game takes place almost entirely on the Great Sea, complete with waves and tides that rise and fall around small islands. Storms and a full day and night cycle showcase the sea in different moods and tones. I think Wind Waker in general also does a great job of showing water in motion, whether that's the swelling of the ocean, smaller currents on the islands, or pouring fountains and waterfalls. The scope of the water on display is impressive. It stretches literally as far as you can see in any direction. Although the surface uses a repeating texture system to accomplish this feat, it's rarely noticeable, and watching your boat rise and fall with the waves is a neat trick. Although Wind Waker gets all of the credit, Twilight Princess actually features arguably more complex water systems of its own between the two Zelda games. We see glittering streams and ponds throughout Ordon Village and the Faron Woods, which still look great today. The light convincingly dances across the surface. Rivers run through Hyrule Field. Lake Hylia offers a huge body of water, complete with its own minigame to guide a canoe down rapids. Zora's Domain features a towering waterfall and sparkling ponds, and there's even a fishing hole where you can relax and try and earn some rupees. Twilight Princess features more extensive water than probably most remember, and this Zelda game even has a proper water temple based entirely around changing currents. Pikmin 1 and 2 are perhaps underrated entries in the context of water. These games sort of aggressively simulate water caustics, or the way light bounces around as it penetrates the surface to create these interesting patterns. Perhaps most impressively, each of your 99 Pikmin can also have their own interactions with the water. So blue Pikmin will safely follow you around and cause their own little ripples, while the other colors each have their own drowning animations if they get caught in the current. It's sort of wild to think that the GameCube was processing up to 100 different water animations at once, even if they are sort of basic splashing visuals. Some enemies also flop down on the water surface and cause splashes and disturbances. It's all very subtle, but it's meticulous and expertly crafted. It's also worth noting that there's plenty of GameCube games where water only plays a minor role, but still looks surprisingly good. For example, Mario Kart Double Dash actually has some nice looking water on various tracks, sometimes just small pools glistening in the sun, and other times larger bodies that you can actually drive through. Rogue Leader only has a single mission that features significant water, but it looks great and reflects a convincing sunset. There's a ton going on in this mission, with walkers even coming out of the water. Battalion Wars features water throughout many of its missions, usually in the form of nice-looking lakes and rivers, though occasionally you'll even battle on the coast of the ocean. F-Zero GX features moments of surprisingly nice-looking water. Big Blue has perhaps the most beautiful waterfalls on the system, and when you drive underwater, you can actually look up and see the light dancing on the surface above you, sometimes as a sea monster floats by. It's a convincing effect that looks great. Now there's one other pair of games I just have to talk about in this video, which are Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Yes, I understand that these are not GameCube games, but it's important to remember that the Wii was essentially a slightly more powerful version of the GameCube hardware. After seeing how good this water looked in the Switch 2 remasters, I just had to go back and look at the original versions, which led me down a rabbit hole of exploring water in 2000's Nintendo games. And these two games sort of nicely bookend the decade in which Nintendo was obsessed with water. The Wii reused much of the same architecture with slightly increased clock speeds, which is partially what enabled backwards compatibility. I think the water in Galaxy 1 and 2 looks very good for the Wii. I would argue it even looks and feels almost as good as the water in any 360 or PS3 game, despite significantly weaker hardware. The water feels highly interactive and looks beautiful both on the surface as well as underwater when you're looking upwards towards the sky. There's all kinds of neat underwater effects and creatures throughout the experience. Now, I also want to suggest that at least for the 6th gen consoles, it feels like impressive and extensive water was sort of an idea unique to Nintendo. The PS2 and Xbox, of course, had tons of impressive games. However, I struggled to come up with a comparable list for either system in terms of water that both looks good and feels as interactive and dynamic as what we saw on the GameCube. And the major franchises on those systems weren't as heavily focused on water. Sure, there's classics like Shadow of the Colossus, which features a few massive battles in the water, or the stormy Hydra battle in God of War, the lakes and ocean of Okami, or certain levels in the Jack and Ratchet games. But none of those games reach the pinnacle of what we see with water specifically on the GameCube. They're just not as interactive, nuanced, or immersive as what we saw in Mario Sunshine, Metroid Prime 2, or Wave Race, for example, even if they look nice on the surface, pun intended. I would be curious to know if I'm just somehow missing a ton of amazing examples of water in these games on these competing platforms, or if you agree with this sentiment that the GameCube just delivered an unusually high number of games with very high quality water. So leave a comment with your own top water-driven games from that generation of consoles, and please hit those subscribe and like buttons, and let's discuss.